Welcome back to the Midwinter Minis Titanic Unclean One build, episode 3, sponsored by Unclean. My name's Guy.
And I'm Hattie, and together we're building the biggest Warhammer Nurgle demon ever made, from scratch. And in this episode, it's finally time to sculpt.
We left off on the last episode with a hulking great grey blob, an understructure of hard packing polystyrene, fleshed out with expanding foam, and then given a more solid shell of papier-mâché and painted with a layer of gesso to help our sculpting materials stick well. Now, one big mistake we could make with this massive model is not providing any context clues to the size of the model itself. We want people to be able to see how enormous this is just from a photo, so we're going to add some pre-made, familiar Warhammer scale details first. We scoured through our collective bits boxes looking for Nurgle spares. Now fortunately I've built loads of Death Guard and Nurgle demons in the past, and Hattie has a history of customizing lots of great Unclean ones, so we had a pretty decent selection to choose from.
We cleaned up the edges and got rid of any mould lines, and then used a hot glue gun to gunge them onto bits of the body that they fitted on. The plus side of using hot glue on something like this is that it leaves a gross, slimy finish, which we might leave depending on how it looks at the end. Lots of guts, lots of teeth, lots of amorphous body bits. That's the beauty of Nurgle models, everything fits everywhere.
This dangly bit of chain from the original Great Unclean One kit is too cool to pass up, and it's going to be a big dangly nipple ring.
Not even 2 minutes in and we're already making it weird.
More teeth, more horns, more random faces. I then went around the whole model with a Sharpie just to sketch on where the big folds, goopy bits and face details might end up being. You can kind of start to see what this thing might look like now, huh? At this point, I thought it would be really cool to have a portion of its spine poking through its rotten flesh. I thought that finding a cheap kids' educational model of a skeleton and pilfering the spine would be the easiest option here, but everyone I found was just the wrong scale. And for more time than I'd like to admit, I was actually looking for animal spinal cords and vertebrae on eBay. Turns out that's a thing you can actually buy. But after I saw the horrified look on Hattie's face, I decided that 3D printing was probably the safest bet. I found this cool anatomically correct spine model from Dave Makes Stuff on Thingiverse. Now, after my last botched 3D printing effort, I made sure the model was solid and not hollow, gave the resin vat a proper clean, filtered, mixed and re-poured the resin, and most importantly, cleaned the finished prints off inside, away from the window. And hey, what do you know, they look fine, and they didn't explode in the curing station. It's all coming up Millhouse. And again, nothing special here, just lining them up to make sure they were in size order, and then I just hot glued them onto the back of the model. The last little bit at the top got the end snipped off just so the hooky bit was poking out by itself.
With those details locked in place, it's time to sculpt. For the bulk of the body, we're going to be using DAS clay, at least for the parts that don't need super sharp detail, kneading in a bit of PVA glue and a little squirt of baby oil to make it extra smooth and a bit easier to work with. To test it out, Guy started applying it to the big floppy tongue coming out of the central head following the concept sketch he made. And if you're wondering what that knobbly green stick thing is, it's one of the many custom sculpting and texture tools I made back in April. It's a fun little video if you haven't seen it already, and rather than boring you all with the same information again, if you want to know how I made them and used them to make these gross test pieces, go and watch that after this. After rolling all that texture onto the tongue, adding little stick-on beads as pustules, and smoothing out the central area with a wet paintbrush, we were pretty happy with how that was looking, so we just soldiered on. We fleshed out and smoothed the bits around the glued-on plastic parts to make them sit in the flesh of the model better, using all my weird and wonderful, bobbly, gnarly and bumpy tools to give the rotting infected skin some texture.
There's also two nice lumpy bits under the insectoid head that I reckon, instead of just making them bumpy foldy fat bits, would make really odd, unsettling breasts. This one got a bumpy nipple bead and lots of orange peel skin using a ball of rolled up tinfoil, and the other one got a ravenous little demon mouth for a nipple. Gross enough for you? Oh baby, we're just getting started.
Now this is probably going to be one of the most fun bits of the project, and I wasn't going to let Guy hog all the glory, so I took over sculpting for the main breast, adding a big fat nipple and going all in on the texturing. I also added some seriously stretched out, strained skin above it. This could very well be the biggest boob in Warhammer, so the sagging is quite understandable. The other main boob is a little smaller, but to make it unique in its own way, I gave it a little 3-bead nipple in the style of the Nurgle logo. Pretty proud of that one.
Now, I suppose we're getting to the moment of truth. Let's add a layer of clay to one entire buttock and see if the texture tool makes it look the part. That's a big canvas after all. I mean, I think it's definitely going to work. This isn't even painted yet and it's already looking pretty awesome. The legs and feet are still a bit of a weird shape, I think, so I carve back into the structure, past the crusty shell outer layer, and remove some of the height of the foot that's facing forwards. And believe it or not, we've already used an entire pack of DAS clay on this model already. Time to crack open pack number 2, mix it up with PVA and oil again, and start building up the feet and legs. To kick things off, haha, get it? I laid on some thick sausages of clay and smushed them flat on the upper edge, giving them a vaguely realistic fat roll look. Once I covered the foot with clay and roughly shaped it, I made some chunky little toes out of clay, placed them on and smoothed them out, using the carving tool to remove some of the excess clay and start building up a bit more of a realistic gnarly foot shape. I've got an absolutely disgusting plan involving fake press-on nails, so to make space for them, I gouged out the nail beds. How are you feeling, by the way? Wincing yet?
Attention, Imperial citizen. You may believe your data is secured within the hallowed cogitators of the Omnissiah, but I assure you, it is not. Heretical data brokers are collecting and trading your personal data without your knowledge. Contact details, political leanings, social status, purchase history, to the highest bidder. Not ideal. Fear not, citizen. I have found the solution to this insidious data plague. Incogni. Automatically, it commands the data brokers to purge your records on your behalf, doing the tedious and messy work for you. You can, of course, undertake this task yourself, although you may find that manually requesting data removal from hundreds of brokers becomes tedious. Incogni performs this task swiftly and efficiently, freeing you to focus on the things that matter in your life, such as your devotion to the Emperor. If this appeals to your sense of duty, citizen, I bring you more joyous news. By utilizing the hyperlink attached to this transmission, you can acquire the services of Incogni for 1 Terran year at a highly discounted rate of 60% off. Command your browsing interface to follow the hypertext transfer protocol incogni.com/midwinterminis and use the code midwinterminis at checkout to receive your discount and safeguard your data. As a loyal servant of the Emperor, I implore you to do what is required.
While Guy was on foot duty, I was busy with the butt cheeks, adding nasty lips around a gaping wound and layers of sagging skin at the bottom. I know this looks like we're racing through this all edited down in this video, but this process took a few days, and we're on to our 3rd block of DAS clay now. To be honest, we're just using the same techniques over and over again, so we don't want to bore you with saying the same stuff. So please enjoy this absolute sensory nightmare I had to endure, kneading oil and glue into the last block of DAS clay while it rained heavily outside. You're welcome. And also, it turns out I can't leave Guy alone for 1 second. I had just assumed he was sculpting normal skin around the central head, but no. He's basically made it look like it's an angry baby's head erupting from a diseased... Look, I know what it looks like, you know what it looks like. Let's just leave it at that.
To add some extra nastiness to the spine, I soaked some yarn in PVA glue until it felt like the nastiest, claggiest spaghetti you've ever had, and then I wove it between the vertebrae to look like sinewy, torn muscle strands. I then squirted loads of hot glue down on it, letting it dribble and drip like nasty slimy gunge. Now time to build up the other side with the kneeling leg and the more obscured foot. A bit trickier this one, but with lots of awkward poking through the gaps, I got it looking half decent, and then it just needs a bit of flesh texture. We both found the skin was way easier to texture once the crude shapes were already sculpted on and left for a couple of hours. So the process was just quite long and had lots of going back and forth between bits adding more and more subtle details as they started to firm up and could withstand sharper tools without tearing. We tried to leave some areas a bit plainer than others, which will leave us more freedom to have fun when we're painting. Almost every area got a few passes with the multi-pronged scraper once it was almost dry to add some realistic skin texture, all those tiny crisscrossing lines that you have everywhere, but obviously exaggerated because this model is enormous. Diseased elephant skin is the kind of vibe we were aiming for. The left arm has lots of space on it on the upper half, so I jammed in some snipped up cocktail sticks to look like little spiky growths coming out of the skin, and I also added a sausage of clay encircling the top of the tongue, and jammed in some of those dental crowns that I used on the butthole tank back in 2022. I made sure to leave lots of empty gum holes too, where its teeth might have been once, jamming in the tip of the knobbliest tool to make gross looking empty sockets. Once I start sculpting on the high detail bits with Milliput, there will be more detailed lips covering a lot of this. I just want to add the detail underneath before it starts getting too hard to reach. And once that was done, I suppose that's really all the crude sculpting we have to do. There are lots of things that still need to be taken care of, the heads, faces, the hands, and they'll need sculpted in a material that can hold more fine detail.
Okay, story time. For a few weeks now, I've been hearing the occasional ticking noise in the studio, and this week while we were working on this horrible thing, I finally figured out what it was. It was this box of twisty wood roots that Guy bought off of Temu to use as Warhammer terrain. We were actually keeping them nearby because we were thinking of using them as horns for this model. But on closer inspection...
I found the source of the ticking! It's a pipe bomb! Yeah!
It turned out the box was ticking because there was some kind of exotic wood-eating bug inside the roots, boring holes through them and generally annoying the hell out of me. There's only one solution.
Brother, get the flamer. The heavy flamer.
So a bit of pest control out the way, that seems like a reasonably good place to call it for this stage. If you're wondering how we chose the faces of the drawn on heads, they were selected by our awesome supporters over on Patreon. We've been sharing loads of work in progress stuff with them on this project, and they've been helping us make the big design choices along the way. If you want to have your say for the next video, use the link below and sign up from just £2 a month. You'll also get added to our super friendly Discord server, get access to polls to shape future videos, and a tasty discount for our merch store. And to be honest, if you were thinking about getting one of our cool t-shirts, the Patreon exclusive code itself will save you as much money as 3 months of Patreon membership, so I think it's a pretty good deal. Also, new sign-ups get a shout out when they join, just like these awesome newcomers. George Miller, Mischievous Rocket, Artie Block, Charisma, Sammy JJ, Solaris, High Lord Inquisitor 7, Jason Bodason, Mig the Merciless, Nayroth, Rene, Rick Keats, Michael Thurston, and Cardamon. And by the way, just in case you're wondering how big this thing is so far, here's some vaguely common 40k models: a Chaos Space Marine, a Plague Bearer, a drone, and even a great Unclean one. And oh my goodness me, look at this thick lad. Now maybe you're more familiar with Imperial stuff like a knight, and oh, would you look at that, it's such a little cutie compared to this monster.
Well, we wanted to make a Titan-sized Great Unclean one, and I think we're hitting the brief pretty well so far. The Warlord Titan might have a bit more going on above the head, but they're basically looking at each other face to face, which is fun. And once we start working on the heads, we're going to be adding big gnarly horns, which will add more height too. We'll just have to find some new ones that aren't infested with termites. Good old Temu, eh? Safe to say that bridge has been burned, along with the bugs.
Now one thing we'd love to hear your ideas for in the comments would be ways to create cool looking hands to hold the enormous weapons we're making for it. The giant plague sword and the enormous rotting bell. I've had a couple of ideas, but I'm not sure which would work best. I thought it might be fun to scan one of my hands and one of Hattie's hands with some kind of 3D scanner and print them out smaller, and then make them look gross and nasty with sculpting details. Or I thought maybe getting hold of some kind of half-sized or child-sized skeleton hand educational model, breaking up the bones and reshaping them around the handles, and then sculpting on the flesh on top of them might work quite well, although it might be a bit gross. I also thought it might be weirdly cool to make plaster casts of my kids' hands holding the weapons. They're 3 now, believe it or not, and their hands are almost the perfect size for this. That is a pretty rogue idea though, and I'm not sure they'd sit still for long enough for me to do it. What do you reckon? Let us know in the comments, and while you're there, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the future episodes. Massive thanks to Incogni for sponsoring this video. Don't forget to head along to incogni.com/midwinterminis and use the code midwinterminis to get 60% off an annual plan. That's crazy. And thank you so much for watching. And we'll catch you next time. Bye for now.
Bye bye.